Greetings, everybody, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual edition of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area, and offering of respect on this auspicious occasion for those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome back to the house our dearly beloved Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, joined by the wonderful master illustrator Paul Peart-Smith, celebrating the launch and publication of their new book, Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz's Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, a Graphic Interpretation. It is published by our friends over at the wonderful Beacon Press. It is a graphic adaptation of the influential New York Times bestseller and American Book Award-winning history of the United States as told from the perspective of Indigenous peoples. This edition has been developed to be accessible for readers of all ages. Recognized for his adaptation of W.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk and his respected position in the comics industry, Paul Peart-Smith collaborated with graphic novel editor Paul Buhle to generate a striking graphic novel adaptation of this really influential book. It is certain to rekindle crucial conversations about the centuries-long genocidal program of the U.S. settler colonial regime. This is a history that has largely been omitted from the public record until very recently. Paul Peart-Smith and Roxanne Ortiz's collaboration has yielded a book that is at once accessible and at the same time does justice to the spirit of its original print edition. We will have Roxanne and Paul in conversation tonight discussing their collaboration of their new book, and we're also going to have a Q&A towards the end of the evening. Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz is the New York Times bestselling author of numerous books. She has been active in international Indigenous movement for more than 4 decades and is known for her lifelong commitment to national and international social justice issues. She is the winner of the 2017 Lannan Cultural Freedom Prize. Her published works include Loaded, A Disarming History of the Second Amendment, which City Lights was very honored to be able to publish. Also the book Outlaw Woman, Not a Nation of Immigrants, and of course, An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, a recipient of the 2015 American Book Award. She makes her home in San Francisco. Paul Peart-Smith is a celebrated cartoonist, illustrator, designer, animator, and concept artist with over 35 years of experience in his fields. He has worked on comics for the 2000 AD, including Slaughter Bowl from its digital-only collections, amongst many, many other wonderful projects. He is the illustrator and adapter of W.B. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk, the graphic interpretation. And he comes tonight from Tasmania, Australia. So we are so grateful that he could make it. So join us now in offering a warm welcome to Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz and Paul Peart-Smith. Welcome to City Lights. Such an honor, such a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. So good to be at City Lights always. You've never been to San Francisco, I think, have you, Paul?
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I've got a lot of traveling around America to do.
Yeah, City Lights is a very famous place. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait to get there.
The old beatnik bookstore that still is going strong. You know. So yeah, we're happy to be here. I wanted yeah, it's about 10 o'clock in the morning for you on Tuesday right now, isn't it?
It's Tuesday afternoon, 12:20,
Afternoon.
sorry, so 12:12 p.m. Yeah, so this is civilized for me. This is fine.
Yes.
I've had a coffee.
Good.
You know what I mean? I'm kind of into the flow of the day.
Yes. Well, I'm so glad we're able to connect with the book. And I wanted to ask you to tell us about a little more. Peter told us about some of your work, but you know, just how you came into this as an artist, and what do you think of the power of pictures as well as words?
Well, I'm a lifer. You know, there's an old saying, like, if you get them for the first 10 years of their life, then you get them for the rest of their life. Um, there are two stories that I bump around in my head as my origin story, two origin stories. One of them was I was ill around the age of 5. I had flu and bedridden, and my mother went out and got me some entertainment. Happened to be a couple of comic books. One was a war comic. It was screaming Spitfire jet on the cover and a German shouting Achtung, and it was, you know, all in your face. But it didn't really kind of vibe with me. The other was a very glossy, brightly colored Shazam comic with Captain Marvel on the cover, or Shazam as it's called these days, having discovered an alien with the opposite powers to him. So where Captain Marvel's outfit was red, this alien's outfit was yellow, and vice versa. And that really got me. And from then on, I started buying, and they had a tradition of reprinting American comics in the UK in black and white editions. They were landscape, strangely landscape shaped. They used to cut the pages in half somehow and sort of present them. I think the idea was is that you could get two sheets, whole comics to a sheet. If you cut them in half, then you get more bang for your buck, sort of thing. Um, so I started seeing Jack Kirby and John Buscema and all these kind of like classic Marvel artists, and obviously Stan's big bombastic dialogue, and that really took me. That really took me. So that's origin story number one. Now, origin story number two is that my uncle, he was only a couple of years older than me, 4 years older than me, actually, 4 years older than me. My grandmother was, she lived a full life, let's put it that way. He had his own collection, and whenever I would go over to his place, I would, you know, he and I would secrete ourselves into his room, get out all his comics. I'd bring some of mine, and we'd be lying around looking at these stories, and he would have ones that I didn't have. I would have ones that he didn't have. And he had a wonderful way of telling the kind of history of these characters, which kind of made them into almost holy writ. And then, so between those two experiences, I was hooked, started copying and drawing my own comics. And then I went off to college, and they tried to kind of beat it out of me. Back then, there wasn't really there wasn't really an idea that this could be something that was important to culture. And so I went off and I did illustration and a bit of sculpture and fine art and all that sort of stuff. But comics was always there in the back of my mind. And so when I left, I went off and I got my first work in comics, 2000 AD, the aforementioned 2000 AD, which is a big sci-fi comic in the UK. I'm originally from London. And I got my first gig there, drawing some what they call future shocks, which is kind of like a little bit like EC stories, like O. Henry stories, where you know the protagonist comes to a cropper at the end, little 3-page things, but really fun to draw. And then I graduated from that to doing more of their bigger characters, and it's just continued on from there. So that's how I started in comics, just enjoying them as a kid, understanding how powerful the language was. Actually, most of my vocab seemed to have come from comic books at that early age. You know, I was saying words like inevitable at age 7, or you know, it's like you don't really say inevitable to anybody for any reason.
Right.
Just mainly because of those kind of comics, you know. Yeah, I moved on to the work that I'm doing today. I always, at the back of my mind, thought about this whole idea of escapism. And as I grew older and got more knowledgeable about the way the world works, and the sort of stresses that puts on people. At first, I thought, well, this is a noble thing to do, to offer people a way of escaping their woes for the length of a comic. But the more I went on, the more I realized that actually, I think we need to be looking at things rather than escaping from them. And somehow my career has kind of bended its way towards that goal, with this book being the top of the tree. Yeah, so it's been it's a wonderful opportunity, and I'm so glad that I got it.
It's just amazing and magical, the adaptation. You know, I was very skeptical when Paul, our friend Paul Buhle,
Yeah.
proposed this idea to me. And I'm sure my editor at Beacon Press was also a bit skeptical, because they'd never done anything like this. But Paul's a good salesman, and showed me some books. And because for myself, I loved comics when I was young. We all did. I lived in a very rural place, and it was, we didn't get all the comics, but they'd bring a new one in, all the kids would rush, and most of us really couldn't, didn't have the money to buy them. But at the store, the only store in that rural town, they let us sit there and read them. We'd just sit on the floor and read the comics, and the Sunday paper with the comics. But when you get to be 11, 12, the teachers, your parents, or older brothers and sisters say, okay, now it's time to read real books and put your comics away, just as you would, I don't know, take a child, now you have to be a different age. And so I never thought of comics for adults, that would be strange. So it's all new to me, and I was very skeptical, but I'm just in love with this book. It's I don't know, let's see it backwards, but you see how beautiful it is, and design, and your artwork. And I've noticed, today is Columbus Day, and I think you're being a Brit in Tasmania, that doesn't mean very much to you. It's only the Americas, really, and Spain, of course, that this has any, and the Pope, of course, the Pope was involved in sending Columbus to the heathens, to the Western Hemisphere. They didn't intend to go to the Western Hemisphere. They wanted to go actually to Indonesia, they didn't know that big continent was between Europe and Asia, so they bumped into it. But I noticed today, when it's Columbus Day, and we all hate it now, we call it Indigenous Peoples Day, and most people, just Columbus, we've worked very hard, and we've really discredited him. He used to be a major hero in the United States, and some still hang on to it, some hardcore Catholics, because he was he brought Catholicism to the people who they thought needed it. So I went through the book, and I got to, it's a sort of follows my chapters in the book, and to see what you had to say about Columbus, because when I went through the whole book, I wasn't thinking to look for Columbus, and I saw the boats, and I figured, okay, that's about Columbus, but I saw his name isn't there, and I was really, I don't know, it made me very joyful that his name's not there, just this boat, with a sail and a kind of ugly looking person who has no name. And it sort of put Columbus in his place. And so that was kind of nice today. And the book actually came out, for October being, I don't know, it turns into Columbus month. And here in San Francisco, we have the Blue Angels flying. There's all the ships come in, and people can go on them, and some of them are military ships, some of them are cargo ships, and some of them old ships. And the Blue Angels, these jets, strafe us for 3 days. It's just like I see they fly through my hill where I live, Russian Hill, and you could actually just look out the window and almost touch the wing of this jet. They terrorize us every year. And fortunately, It was foggy this weekend, and they were not able to fly. So that was wonderful. I said I really was grateful for the fog. But yeah, the Native people in the hemisphere have pretty well done a job now on Columbus. So I think that everyone who looks at this, Native people, and say, Columbus isn't named here. He doesn't have that. It's a kind of authority to have a name. He's just an invader.
Well, it wasn't a deliberate thing. I'm not meaning to be mischievous anyway. But the story is told from an Indigenous people's point of view.
Right.
And the flow of it and the energy of it seemed to somehow flow past him. It didn't make a big deal of him. There are other figures, settler figures, obviously, who are featured, but really, that's the point of this book, wasn't it? This is what I got. The point that the whole reason why you did this thing was to tell the story from the point of view of the people who had landed on, rather than the people who were doing the landing.
Right.
So yeah, it just seemed to flow naturally around him. I mean, we do mention the conquistadors, and and as you say, the ship's there.
Yeah.
But he was a symptom of a larger issue, and I felt, I don't know, he just did not appear on my horizon. He just was not important to the thrust of the story. So I'm sorry for all those Columbus fans who were looking for him in the book. Sorry to disappoint, but it wasn't a malicious thing. It just wasn't, this is not that book. There are plenty of books about Columbus. This is not that book.
Well, it's such a powerful presentation. I know, my book has reached really a lot of people. It's been published in Spanish and French, and hopefully some other languages will come. There's a young people's edition of it. And this, though, is something so special to have. I just, I have it propped up on my desk where I work, and I look at it. It just makes me happy every time I look at it. And then I start thumbing through it again. And so I know that, I've been convinced now, and it's hard to convince an older person, of something they hung on to, that comic books are for children. that this is a kind of an amazing way to communicate. It's visual, I always say I'm not very visual. I have a daughter who is an artist, and I'm just enthralled of her work. It's just like, but I write, and there's not much colored, or interesting things about the written word, although you can read it and your imagination has pictures, but
Yeah, absolutely. Don't put yourself down at all. I mean, the way that
no,
you use words is your artistry, and it was part of the. So I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. But I just had this thought that part of the task of adapting this to comics was to find a way to retain your voice without but while editing it in a way that a comic book editor might do.
yeah,
There's a kind of a trade-off that has to be, there's a balance that has to be hit between words and pictures within a panel. And if you have too much of the words, then it kind of like stops the flow of picture. And if the picture's really intense, you have to be careful how much words you use. It is primarily a visual medium, but that at its best, when words are used in a very directed way, that
right,
sort of they both equally take on, the task of telling a story. Sometimes they work in counterpoint to each other. Sometimes you say something in words that you have the opposite happening in the panel, and that itself is another form of saying something.
right.
So yeah, I did a little bit of editing, but only because while I did it, I realized the joy you have with using words, the freedom that you have to say things in a way that takes a reader on a trip by itself, all the energy that is in that. Sadly, I had to sort of like, kind of balance that with the imagery so that one didn't take over the other. You're a very powerful writer, so I had to,
Thank
you
you.
know.
Well, look at I love it when you have me and you draw me, and several times where you have me saying, you kind of quote almost verbatim of the text, and it has me kind of as a figure who's teaching, because I'm also a teacher. And
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just really special, the seeing myself in that really engaged with the audience, and of course my students, I'm talking to. So it's really an amazing way to deal with very, very deep issues. I think, there's genocide in this. So it's comic is a word. It's really a graphic. There's nothing funny about
No,
it, but it is, it humanizes, I think, Native people in a way that is hard to do in words. The fullness of the power of their own knowledge and histories, that it really comes through in your drawings.
well, I love that you, in the original book, gave a lot of space over to the actual words of Native Americans, their own testimony to
Yeah,
what they were going through, their own description of the issues that they had, and the way that they described the people who had come in. And they tried their best, it seems to me, to welcome people and try and understand them. And there's a lot of kind of like the modern equivalent would be like, what is up with you? There's a lot of sort of like, why are you doing this? Why are you plying us with drink? Why are you being so violent when, we can talk
Right.
about this, we can work things out, sort of thing. Now, there's no doubt that obviously there was resistance and violence and
Right.
retaliation to the violence that was visited upon them. And we won't kid ourselves that there wasn't, obviously violence between tribes before um, the Europeans got there. But the overall feeling that you get from this is that there was a lot of work the Europeans had to do. They brought a lot of baggage with them that they landed on these people that, if they could have just chilled out for a moment and actually talked through some of their issues, we could have had a lot kinder outcome. But I love, like I say, those testimonies of those, and I tried to fit as many in as possible in the book of actual speeches from Native Americans who were involved.
Yeah, and Native Americans are very their oral history and told with the voice is so powerful, and I think their hospitality meant a lot, because there were many nations, 500 plus nations in North America alone, with different languages, different housing, like the Pueblo Indians. They have, apartment structures, whole cities. Other people have a bark place. The Haudenosaunee had huge places where very collective, living. And so just the variety of people. But I think the Europeans coming brought with them that none of this, it was, this was all made with organic materials, with wood, with clay, and perfectly, really, if you ever see the pueblos of, or, in Peru and these places where they built, but it wasn't European style, with gold on it, or, gold didn't mean very much to the native people. And there's a whole thing about, of course, killing so many people here in Northern California to get to gold, and get them out and, be able to mine it. And one of the worst genocides in the history of the continent. So yeah, it can be a very such a tragic story. I know I still get a lot of my book is now a decade this year that it's been published, but still read a lot, and I get a lot of mail, email, letters, telling how much the book meant to them, and how hard it was to read these truths, but it makes me realize that if telling the truth, there's so much withholding of truth, thinking you're protecting people, like in school, you don't want, these horrible stories to be told, but actually you're not, you're able to give information that is tragic to young people. And I think young people adults read these these adult comics, but also young people read them, and if their parents will let them, that's another problem. But they can sneak around and read. And I think that's really scaring a lot of people who don't want, for instance, to tell the real truth about the United States and the genocide, and of course, slavery. And you did a book, Souls of Black People, that is also very powerful and very popular book.
Yeah.
It's a really effective teaching tool.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think you're right that this kind of puts a fear up a lot of people who feel it would be easier if we just put that all behind us and didn't think about it and then, just moved on. And I understand that fear. I don't think there's much that humans do that I don't get now, even if there are things that are heinous that I completely disagree with. Everything comes from a feeling of needing to protect yourself in one way or another.
Yeah.
And some people go to some extremes in order to do that. And one of those extremes, again, is like, trying to ignore the past. But the thing is that they're not trying to ignore the past. They try and rewrite it so that it does what they want it to do.
Right.
Which is either to numb people to what's happening now, or to just stop us from actually having the conversations that really need to happen in order to really, really move forwards. We're not as evolved as we think we are. All the things that we look at in the past, we look at and we wonder, how did those people do those horrible things to each other?
Yeah.
Then you just have to turn on the TV and look around, and
Right.
you realize that there's absolutely nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe there is a kind of an internal argument, which is much more visceral and out in the open now. And I hope that those people who are looking for connection and a way forwards win out. It's just that it's not always going to feel like that's happening,
Yeah.
Right now, with what's happening in the Middle East, especially, there's a lot of hangover from the themes of this book.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same mentality, and it has to be looked at. It has to be addressed, no matter how painful it is, because the results are horrendous, So yeah, it's an important time for this book to come. I mean, it's always important for a book like this, but right now, when we seem to be on the same, we're looking at the same process happening, it's super important.
Yeah, I like the way you dealt with in the drawings with the settler colonialism, which is, what we see in Israel, ethnic cleansing and pushing people out of their homelands.
You made that
is,
connection in the book, didn't you? You made that
yeah.
connection between the sort of the covenant. Could you talk a little bit about the covenant, the idea of the covenant, and how it's connected to
The covenant, the
Yeah.
original covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, the covenant of taking the land almost as a what their God wanted them to do, because they looked around them and they didn't see the kind of things that they had in Europe, you know, and also the bloodshed and murder, you know, extremely poor people starving. No one starved in the Americas, you know, because that was the whole point, was to everyone was taken care of one way or another in different ways and different. And not that they didn't have periods of starvation or lack of. I've mainly studied the people of the Southwest, you know, the people who had villages that, of course, that's a desert, you know, it's and sometimes the crops don't grow, and so, but how people found ways to share or to take in other people who were having problems. And there's some of that. I mean, I think that is a deep desire in human people, you know, is to take care of each other. And capitalism has to be the worst thing ever invented for individualizing people, you know, as units and one against the other. And of course, you know, wars of conquest, and not Native people had wars too, you know, over property lines, you know, of interfering or just, you know, but they weren't genocidal, you know, they were not. They then usually they were very good diplomats, so they ended up in diplomacy. And that is often used, well, Indians had wars too, that so they're just as bad, you know, but we humans, you know, we have divorces, we have, you know, we people leaving their families because and that's not, you know, just now. I mean, that's human nature. That we're imperfect creatures, you know. We don't have that like animals do, you know, the programmed life and relationships. We have too big, our brains, you know, get sidetracked from what's best for us. And so society then is just extremely important, you know, it's a delicate thing. And the US is, and you know, and I see Israel doing just trying to destroy, you know, human connections and over power, you know, to have power and land. And so it's, you know, I think Native people have an insight. I learned, you know, not, I was, as a historian, I studied, I wanted to study imperialism in the whole world, you know, Western Hemisphere, but also just European imperialism and colonization. So I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation on the history of land tenure in New Mexico. Because you have to, you know, you have to get a piece of something for a dissertation. And it was so eye-opening, you know, that I learned from myself, you know, I had all my ideas down. I thought I knew what I was going to write, but as I wrote and did research, I thought, boy, there are, you know, really deeper things here that have to be dealt with. But I came out of that year's work so admiring the methods that the people had for resolving their differences, and just how, you know, punishment worked, not imprisoning people, but pushing them out of the community and to be alone was the worst thing in the world for a human. And then bringing them back in, once they've had their lesson, but instead of locking them up, putting them out.
Right. Yeah. Too much freedom. There was, yeah.
Because it's very lonely out there, by yourself. And so it's just so much to be learned. And I think with the graphics, that comes through, in even in the colors, there's some very dark pages, that indicate darkness and difficulties and wars and all. So brilliant. Well, maybe we have some. Do we have any questions?
Paul, did you want to show some images?
Yeah. All right then. Let's show. You just need to allow the screen sharing. Peter, I'm not coming. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Hopefully you can see some art now. Yeah?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, let's see if we can. All right. Okay, so yeah, this is one of the pages where I had to try and find a sort of a counterpoint, a way of illustrating what was happening in the text. So this is much more where I'm letting the text take the lead, but I'm also giving a kind of an emotional context to it. So not a counterpoint, but an emotional context to the text. There were different ways that I had to approach each page. Sometimes it was almost an illustration assignment like this. Sometimes there was much more sort of sequential stuff happening. So in this page, first panel, you see your two characters, you focus in on them on the second panel, third panel, the gunshots, and then the result of that. And this is one of those darker pages that Roxanne was mentioning. But that's much more sort of like what's the word? Moment to moment storytelling rather than an illustration approach. This is more diagrammatical because again, we're trying to sort of like talk about, zoom out and look at a situation. And this page is about the trade routes that were cut off by the early soldiers, Europeans, that they sort of created shortages in food, but they also plied them with plenty of drink. So it caused, degradation of Indigenous groups and society. And this is a moment like what we were discussing earlier, where the testimony of individual actual people are given a spotlight. So this man, his name is King Hagler, has talked about the evils of alcohol and how it's been introduced into their society and the problems that it's causing. And at one point, Hagler goes to the European authorities and he tries to sort of like plead the case for stopping this flow of alcohol, but he was ignored. Violence, obviously, in the top left-hand corner, and the response in the top right corner. Yeah, there's we go through the emotional mill with this story, as you would imagine. And here's one of those shots that Roxanne likes, where I take on drawing her, and she becomes a teacher. Actually, that prompts me to ask: did you feel like a teacher when you were writing the book? Did you feel like you were teaching, or did you feel like you were more expressing a chain of thought without any regard to who was going to be reading it?
Well, you know, I've taught for so long and I love teaching. I started teaching as a teaching assistant in graduate school, and I just did it for, you know, the money. It was, you know, we got paid not very much, but enough to live on. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with teaching. I hadn't had an aspiration to be a teacher or a professor. I really didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew a college education, you know, was something that at least used to be used to be important, and I loved learning. But I just fell in love with teaching, and yeah, so I think it's so much a part of me that's definitely what I always, in all my writing, I think I have this that I'm communicating, you know, hopefully with the reader.
Cool, cool, yeah. Actually, these pages make the connection between the South African and the early Zionist and Puritan ethos, which is based on this whole idea of the covenant, and how Native Americans in the American context became almost like messengers of the devil, that the holy European forces were supposed to subdue. And yeah, it comes from quite a few strands of thought. This one in particular, John Calvin and the Calvinism, which was the sort of philosophy of the of early settlers, is really important to the whole thrust of the way that Europeans looked at the people they were subduing. In this top panel, I mean, Calvin says that human free will does not exist. Certain individuals are called by God and are among the elect. Salvation, therefore, has nothing to do with one's actions. One is born as part of the elect, or not, according to God's will. Although individuals do not know for certain if they are among the elect, material wealth is a manifestation of election. Bad fortune, poverty, and dark skin are evidence of damnation. So this was the kind of moral battery powering this this assault on the people. They were basically, you know, if you were dark and if you were poor by European standards, you were ripe for the taking. And some interesting imagery that flows from that, which you can, which hopefully you will read more closely when you get the book. So yeah, those are the pieces I wanted to share.
Yeah, those are great. That yeah, the Puritan thing, the Calvinist, you know, I was raised as a Calvinist, Southern Baptist Calvinist, and I I really, you know, was really into it. It was my mother, a Southern Baptist. This, you know, this is very deep in the United States psyche. The evangelicals have risen again. They kind of separated themselves from, you know, politics, but around 1970 they decided to take over and create the you know, Calvin's heaven or hell on earth, and really a dictatorship, authoritarianism. And that's I have a whole chapter, in the book about the Scots-Irish, which I descend from, actually. I'm good old Dunbar Scots-Irish. So this is, the other thing, just the type of conquistadors of North America, the Anglo, as it's a bit different in Latin America, the Jesuits in Paraguay and things. It's I don't know. I studied that too. It's just so it's not good. I mean, it's not good, killing and taking over people anywhere, but the result, hundreds of years later, is a very harsh North America, United States. I've been trying to figure it out almost, since I started to college, and started learning these things, because in the United States, I think even a lot today, unless you go to college, you really never learn the true US history. It's camouflaged in ways that all makes it all good, the best in the world, with problems.
Yeah. Well, we all want to think best of ourselves, don't we? We all want to sort of like ignore the blemishes. But yeah, that actually reminds me. I mean, being here in Tasmania, of course, is a very similar origin story to the country.
Oh yeah.
And in Tasmania in particular, all the Aboriginals were wiped out completely. There are no settlements.
Total genocide, yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
But there are now people who can trace back their lineage to Aboriginals who appear as you do. I mean, these are Caucasian people, but they've found a little a line that runs back, and they take pride in that, and actually now speak up for Aboriginal rights across the mainland and within Tasmania. It was a very, very interesting thing to see when I first came here, that people so strongly identified with that part of their own past. So I think that bodes well for the future, that it is possible for people to take on what happened and move forwards, and not hate themselves, but to just take responsibility for it and move forwards. And it's a great thing.
Yeah, well, in the eastern half of the full, United States, it was said they had just simply killed all of the native people, or forced them out into, where I grew up in Oklahoma, to replace, took their land and gave them these little plots of land in a pretty, not very good soil, very not like they had in the South, with the fantastic land, and they corn, beans, and squash, and just the great farmers, and they were pushed out, that they sort of dismissed it. Well, if you want to study about Native people at all in the past, you had to take Western history. If you were, a historian, it's called History of the West, because there were no more Indians east of the Mississippi, which was a total lie. It's just that they didn't have status bestowed upon them by the Anglo government. And now, you know, they've all recovered their, it's been a process of the last, you know, 50, 60 years of recovering their tribal identities and land bases to, I mean, it's still a work in project, but it's pretty amazing how that, you know, myself being in graduate school in the 60s, was, you know, it, you question it, but then you don't meet very many Native people, but they had simply lost status. They had no longer were, if they went west, they could keep their status in Indian territory. But if they didn't, then they had no rights. They were just people, and their land was taken away from them. So that's been a really long process, and like I say, still taking place. There's land issues, you know, that land back is the main slogan of the Native movement now. Land back, give it back. So that's yeah, and in writing the book, I, you know, had done the studies of land tenure and all. I was very focused on the importance of land and home place and belonging, and yeah, there's a lot of suffering, and of course Australia's even was more ethnically cleansed. I've never been there, but in the UN work we were doing, there was always a Australian Aborigine delegation, you know, teaching each other just horrible things. The same kind of people, you know, Scots Irish people that yeah. So let's see. Maybe I'll try to call on someone.
We've got some questions. We've got actually there's a question up front from someone in the NAACP in Santa Cruz. It surprised me that the artist is English and not American. Can Paul comment on the unique perspective he brings to Dr. Dunbar-Ortiz's text?
Good question.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. It surprised me that I'm not American. I read so many comic books growing up. I feel like it's a responsibility that I take seriously. I do feel that there is a kind of a distance that I have, obviously not being Native American either. And I did sort of, you know, I had a bit of internal dialogue about that as to whether it would be right for me to do it. But I was the one who asked. I had the heart I was in the right place, but I was also in the right moment of my life and in my career where I wanted to take on this important subject and do the very best I could with it. Yeah, I just feel like obviously I'm able to completely forget about characters like Columbus. So I guess that's the advantage of being British, is that I don't have the same sort of is stress point's the right word, but I don't feel beholden to hitting certain notes in this story. I was much more focused on making sure that the perspective of the original book was reproduced in this graphic novel form. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's really amazing. That as an outsider, I mean, there are, you know, different points of view possible, but as an outsider, but an artist, you know, to take that on, I think it makes it very fresh. You know, it's someone who would be, you know, I think was considered different artists, and some didn't pan out and all. And then, Paul Buhle said, I think we have someone really, really, that would fit this well. And I had no idea, who I thought you were an Australian for a long time. You're a Brit.
Yeah, who escaped.
I didn't, I mean, it's just it's really nice because there is, I think insisting on representation is sometimes very sort of, especially to do with art and writing and all. It kind of closes off a lot of creativity and interchange, So I just think you are the perfect person for it. Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you.
So Carol says graphic books like the George Lewis March series and George Takei's They Called Us the Enemy have been highlighted at venues like Comic-Con and drawn big audiences. These events appear to reach new audiences in a positive way. Have either of you found yourselves invited to venues like Comic-Con?
Certainly not me.
Not yet, not yet. But this could be the beginning of something new, for sure. You could be there. I've only been once, back in 2003, I think it was, alongside my good friend Charlie Adlard, who went on to draw The Walking Dead and that sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, it's been a while now where people have realized that comics really can have some impact in terms of telling big stories. I hope that this book follows in the footsteps of that wonderful March series, and the work of Joe Sacco, his book on Palestine, and the Notes from Gaza, and the work that he did in the Balkan Wars. Yeah, it's a very big part of the sort of not the mainstream comics industry, which is still very fantasy based, but the world outside of that. It's kind of like a brilliant outreach projects that actually speak to people who are not interested in capes or fantasy or effects and that, but are interested in the things that are happening in the world today. So yeah, long may that continue. And this is another brick in that wall.
So Paul, what's next?
Next is another very non-controversial project centered around Malcolm X.
Oh, great.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
think Paul told me that. Yeah, that's great.
yeah, I tend
Is this
to
Beacon
step
Books?
out. No, it's not with Beacon. This is with Rutgers University Press. But
Oh, wow.
I tell you, if I love working with Rutgers as well. But if Beacon has another project, I'd be more than happy to leap into it. They've been very, very good for me. Very, very good for this project. And
What book is it, the Malcolm based on? Or is it based on a particular book like mine?
it's mainly based on the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley.
Oh, yeah. So that's
Is,
interesting
yeah,
because
yeah.
there are some problems with that. You have to check out some of the
Well,
others.
it's an incredible book in terms
It
of
is. It is.
as a feat of writing. It
Oh,
is extraordinary.
it is
Uh,
extraordinary.
we are bringing in a larger focus on his mother and father. Actually, the first few chapters are
Mhm.
focused on their relationship and their advocacy for the Marcus Garvey movement. So we're just trying to put Malcolm into a context that would make what he turns out to be make a lot more sense to those who do not know the sort of backstory to him. So yeah, that's the project I'm working on right now.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Roxanne, how about you?
exciting. Well, I'm working on a book, which may become a comic book, on white nationalism. And I'm doing an essays on white nationalism. And it's, it's kind of overwhelming because there's so many books coming out. They're kind of, I stopped buying them. I was buying all these books on white nationalism and white Christian nationalism, and they're all very journalistic and all. And, they're not very helpful. It's just like freak out, horrible things these people are doing, and not getting into the history of, it's always been a white nationalist country, this is nothing new. And so that's, my essays. It's I am doing one on white Christian nationalism, which is a kind of a specific thing. It was going to be all on white Christian nationalism, and I decided I wanted to, I wanted to be more flexible than that and deal with some things that might not, you might not think of right away. And I'm also in this one, unlike other books, I have written 3 works of memoir, I call a historical memoir. But so it's not memoir, but I am bringing my own voice into it, my own experience. For instance, the white Christian nationalism, being raised in that, in an all-white rural town, and this is Southern Baptist. I feel like I have a lot of insight into the mentality, and so in each one I have a kind of I don't know, I have one called that I'm basing on Bruce Springsteen's album Nebraska, his 1980 album Nebraska, because it
great.
really does deal with the white, the whiteness, and it's also the couple, the young white couple who went on a killing spree, and just walked into people's houses and killed them. And it's a very, it's a beautiful song. It's a very deep thing. So it's going to be a lot different from my previous books, but I'm really enjoying the kind of freedom, from footnotes and stuff. It'll have a few footnotes, but not very many.
It might be churlish to mention it, but down the line, if you ever want to do it, that sounds like a fantastic idea for a graphic novel.
Yeah, it does. I think so. I may call it. I'm not getting very far on it. I've got to get busy. I get stopped because so many things, I have to really discipline myself to stick to one point and say, oh, this would make another good essay. I now have about 30, so I've got to get more disciplined.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I'll take this from NDC. Actually, it's one for each of you. To Professor Dunbar-Ortiz, could you speak about your relationship to the legacy of Jack Forbes? And then to Paul Peart-Smith, could you say a word or two about how you came to work on the Du Bois book, and then offer a note on your sense of Professor Dunbar-Ortiz's history and Du Bois's narrative of American history in his book?
Oh, good question. Yeah, Jack Forbes, the historian, he passed away maybe 7 or 8 years ago. He is an extraordinary person. He was one of the first people to write, first historians, actual historians to write accurately on Native people. And he published, I think the book was 1960. And I was in graduate school at the time. And that book was just, it just put me in I think it led me to, kind of be in his footsteps. And I then met him. I was very nervous because I so admired him, but he was very, very friendly. And of course, we became friends. And he was also an activist. He had traced his own genealogy. He grew up in Virginia. And he traced his own genealogy to being a Native person. He was a genealogist. It's just incredible his deep work into into people. And so he published a book on the Pueblo Apache, Navajo, and Spaniard is the name of the book. It's still a great book. I said it hasn't been surpassed for dealing with what is now the Southwest of the United States. So this is what put me, made me interested in the in that period, and I ended up writing my own dissertation on that. And really grew from his book a lot. So yeah, he was a great mentor to so many people. He taught at UC Davis for many years. He set up, well, he began, and I got involved, he got me involved in it, setting up Native American studies programs in different universities. So I think that was the first one, I think, the one he set up at UC Davis, which is still going strong. All of these things that used to be very small programs, not very well funded and all, are now whole departments, so it's that is a kind of activism, that I was involved with him. Wonderful man.
Paul, do you want me to repeat the question, maybe?
No, I think I got it.
Good.
I got involved with Souls of Black Folk through a little side project thing I did while I had a kind of a fallow period where there wasn't much comics work going on, so I decided to take on my own project. And I was part of a web collective called Activate, which posted weekly episodes of their particular stories. And I had one called 1+1, which was kind of like, often what happens if I don't have a story that's given to me, like a script or anything like that, I tend to move through a kind of a stream of consciousness phase to start myself going. So the visuals come first. And so this story, 1+1, started off as a very visual idea, but seemed to be using a lot of imagery that suggested the subject was colonialism and self-awareness and sort of like mental fragility and the effects of colonization on those who colonize, as well as the people who are being colonized. And so I did this strip for a period of time, and Paul Gravett, a British historian and arts comics historian and sort of connector of people. He's kind of like the nexus where everybody meets. He got wind of this story and at one point wanted to do it as a book. and that may still happen one day. Who knows? I'll keep on at him about it. But he put that work before Paul Buhle, who was looking for someone to adapt souls of Black folk, and I got the gig from based on that. And in terms of similarities with Roxanne's work, W.E.B. Du Bois is a humanist. I mean, he's really he has these two levels, which I think Roxanne does really well as well, where you talk about the big themes, but you can also talk about smaller stories and people's individual stories. And in Souls is set up in a series of essays. So I could sort of like approach each essay in a slightly different way, which kind of like was really attractive to me. But some of the essays would be about big things like education in the Deep South in that period, just after slavery was abolished. And some would be about his particular life. One story, The Passing of the Firstborn, was about the death of his infant son. So you could go from these giant sweeping cast of characters to, you know, small human stories, and as I say, I think there's a connection with an Indigenous people's history of the United States in that it does a very similar thing. Yeah, so I hope I answered the question there.
Well, we find ourselves at the top of the hour. I would like to thank the both of you for spending this time with us. And Roxanne, congratulations once again. Paul, what an amazing job. I have to say, it's very stunning and such a vital and very, very important new addition to our Stolen Continents section. That's what it's called at City Lights. So I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us as well. Roxanne, Paul, do you have any final thoughts or comments?
You first, Roxanne.
Well, thank everyone. And it's wonderful just to have a conversation with Paul. I could talk on and on and on with him. And we have one more. I don't have it with me, but I will post it everywhere that we'll be doing. And thank you so much, Peter, having us at City Lights.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. That's amazing to be invited to do this, and I'm really happy with the way this has flowed. Thank you so much for being a great host. Yeah, I'm available online. My Instagram is under my name, Paul Peart-Smith. You can also sign up there for a newsletter that I do every 2 weeks, which is about art appreciation, but also about sort of what would you call it? Sort of mental health and framing the world and trying to work your way through it, both as an artist and as a human being. And that comes out every 2 weeks, called The Ink Skull. So feel free to sign up. It'd be great to have you. It'd be an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. And everyone, we have posted links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase books, or better yet, if you're in the hood, come on down, pay us a visit at City Lights. We are located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district near the corner of Columbus and Broadway. And we are open 7 days a week. Our hours are from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. We are one of the great browsing experiences of the Bay Area. We would love to see you. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, fostering an active engagement with books and literary culture through our public events, our publishing program, our educational outreach, which is all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and critical thinkers. So long, everyone. Take care. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thanks, Roxanne. You're a star. Thank you, Peter.